9:30 on the dot.
All right.
You know what, this maybe is, that there are a lot of people that
He's a reporter.
that maybe didn't
First
have.
week.
All right, good
Afternoon.
afternoon, everybody. It is officially 5:30 and we're going to go ahead and get started.
About what you see.
I'm going to start by saying that this meeting is being recorded and will be available on our website within 24 hours of this meeting. I move that this meeting of the Arlington Electoral Board be called to order on June 13th at 5:30 p.m. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, call into order. Okay, so minutes from the previous meeting.
They were, I put them, they were under your notebook.
Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, I got them. Okay, just give us a moment here. I just want to take a quick.
Yep. Some latecomers coming.
Did you get a chance to see the minutes yet? All right, yeah, let me go and cast those down for you.
Madam Chair, I move for approval of the minutes of June 9th.
I second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Thank you. We'll get those signed off on and. All right. It is that time, folks, the moment that you're all here for, the election wrap-up.
So I'll start by, we have prepared the post-election report. If you're joining us online, you should be able to get this by going to our website at vote.arlingtonva.gov. And in the green bar at the top, there should be a link to access the report. For those that are in person, you did get a hard copy. So just as a reminder, these post-election reports we started in 2019. And we have been doing one, I think, every election since 2019. So, and we will continue doing one because they do seem to be well received in the community. Yeah. Okay, so the takeaways from this election, 19% of active voters participated in this election, and this is one of the highest turnouts we've seen when there hasn't been a statewide or federal office on the ballot. So from that, those voters that participated, it was 28,897 that participated. 23% of those voters chose to vote early, and 19% of voters chose to vote by mail, with 58% of voters voting on election day. This has been pretty consistent. The split of voters between early mail and election day has been pretty consistent over the last couple of elections. So I know everybody's probably most interested in ranked choice voting, so I won't go over the full report, and we'll just skip straight to ranked choice voting. So if you have the paper copy, you can go to page 10. So one of the big questions that we have, I'll start by saying that data is somewhat incomplete. We don't have access to the full data files that are used for this election. Those are all sealed and transported over to the court after the election. From the data that we do have available, we can see that there were 404 voters who did not vote in the Commonwealth's attorney race. 1,260 voters did not vote in the sheriff's race. And when we look at the county board race in that first ranking, we have 721 voters who did not rank any candidates at all in the race. So that's considered an undervote. If we look at ranked choice voting, the county board race specifically, from the data that is available, we can see somewhere between 85 and 92% of ballots that were cast contained a vote for either one of the two winning candidates. So either a vote for Maureen, a vote for a vote for Susan, or a vote for both of them. Okay, and the reason we don't have the exact percentage is we don't know how many votes for Natalie Roy contained a vote for Maureen, because Maureen didn't pick up any votes after she crossed the threshold, if that makes sense. So we just know those ballots were exhausted.
Tony, can you go back to the previous slide?
Yeah.
Just to mention for a moment on the undervotes, that certainly is very interesting. And I think that we tend to see, for those who may not be familiar to have reason to know, that we tend to see in any election more undervotes the farther down the ballot,
Definitely.
starting with the state offices and then finishing with the county board. So all the numbers are interesting and very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know, because I think sometimes in the past, there's been concern raised about when we have a two-sided ballot, our voters missing one side of the ballot. In this ballot, we had Commonwealth's attorney and sheriff on the same side of the ballot, and county board was on the back side of the ballot. And it seems pretty clear that voters did see and mark both sides of the ballots. So.
And I think that to the extent that the county board is in line with what I would have expected in terms of the general interest in those three races, that the 721 undervotes, I don't think they cannot be attributed to people saying, oh, I'm too confused to vote.
Yeah.
Rather, they were less interested in that race than the Commonwealth's attorney race.
Yeah.
And then, thank you, that was also part of my thinking, again, with what we call ballot fatigue, that we always see invariably every election.
Yeah.
All right, thanks again.
And so the big question that we've gotten after the election has been really about spoiled ballots. Spoiled ballot is when a voter makes a mistake in marking their ballot, they can request a new ballot when voting in person. So we did, when we first started early voting, we were seeing around a 6% spoilage rate on ballots. Because we do have such a long early voting period in Virginia, we have the ability to adapt to how we're interacting with voters. And so we were able to, by the last 2 weeks of early voting, that spoilage rate had dropped considerably. It's to where cumulative, it was 3%, which is in line with what it is normally in elections. Most of the spoiled ballots were on that county board race. And I think it's important to know that voters were spoiling the ballots for a couple different reasons when we interacted with them. So some were spoiling the ballots because they were confused. They were marking two candidates when they should have been only marking one candidate in each ranking. Some voters understood the instructions even after we gave it to them and then chose to mark their ballot incorrectly anyway. And then by the end, especially those last 2 weeks in early voting, I think what everyone on the staff would agree to is that voters, this was ballot design really, they were filling in the wrong oval and they caught their mistake. So you could see them in the booth and they'd be like, oh, I made a mistake. And so before they ever got to the scanner, they knew that they had filled in the wrong oval. And we think that that has to do with, we didn't have vertical lines on the ballot, but that is something we can work to improve should we have to implement ranked choice voting again.
I know you wouldn't have statistics on this, but just observationally, did you notice, I'm assuming like the spoilage rate is sort of just number of spoiled ballots over total.
Yeah.
Like we had a couple of people who needed 3 and 4 ballots.
Yeah. So
yeah, like that makes it look like a higher spoilage rate, but it's actually one person making several errors.
Yeah.
Going to the scanner and it kicks back. If they
Yeah.
get a ballot, they go to the scanner, it kicks back. They need another, like.
yeah.
I think we had that less in early voting because if someone spoiled 2 ballots, we would direct them to the ballot marker. So they were not spoiling more than
We
that.
did, yeah, no, we made a note of that in the report that some voters did spoil several ballots. So you shouldn't take the rate, like when we say 3% of ballots were spoiled, that isn't an indication that 3% of voters made mistakes when marking their ballots. Because we certainly did have, I think our record in early voting, we had one voter who needed 6 ballots before we were finally able to get it read by the scanner. So I definitely, like I said, and it's not always ranked choice voting or the county board race, but that is where a majority of the spoiled ballots that we were seeing are coming from. Yep.
What's normal?
So we don't really aggregate data from election day on what's normal. We do keep track of it during early voting. So and during early voting, it would be 1 or 2% depending on the type of election. So, and the more offices on the ballot, the more ovals there are to fill out, the more likelihood a voter is going to make a mistake when filling in an oval. So yeah.
But if it was 3 total.
Yeah.
That early part where you were seeing like 6%
Yeah.
means that it was balanced out by, like after the adjustments, more normal, 1
Yeah.
or 2%. Okay.
Yeah, and we made the effort. So Dominique is the individual speaking for those on. So we did make an effort to make sure every election officer working this election did receive instructions the night before the election on what we wanted them to say to voters when they were getting their ballot. So specifically, only 1 ranking per, only 1 oval per ranking. In terms of mail ballots, 228 ballots did contain errors. So when a mail ballot is rejected by the scanner, the voter is not there and there's no way to contact the voter to have them correct their ballot. So what happens then is we have a team of election officers examine that ballot and try to determine voter intent. So from the 228 ballots that did contain errors, our election officers were to reasonably be able to determine voter intent on 187 of those. So that means is voters who are voting by mail recognize that they made a mistake and they marked their way in such a way that our election officers could understand what they wanted to do. So maybe they, whatever they were doing, they were. And so when I say, so that means totally there were only 44 overvoted ballots between mail and provisional that we were not able to determine any voter intent. And I know the electoral board saw some of the provisional ballots, and in this case, voters were filling in sometimes every single oval on the ballot for every race. So it's not necessarily an issue isolated to the county board ranked choice voting race.
That is correct.
So.
Question, did elect provide guidance for your election officers in terms of how to determine intent?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so so I believe it was in the May state board meeting, they did approve new guidelines on how to determine like what is an acceptable mark and what isn't an acceptable mark, and that did include information in ranked choice voting.
Yeah, and Frank, I can tell you there were pages and pages. I read through all of it.
It is about a 25-page document of this is a mark you can count, this is not a mark you can count. So, yeah. So we did distribute a post-election survey to our election officers. About half of the individuals who worked the election responded. So from those that did respond, 94.5% rated the training that they received on ranked choice voting as either excellent or good. So every election officer that worked this election did attend training in person, and they were given a workshop on how ranked choice voting is tabulated to help them explain ranked choice voting to voters. And from that, 89.1% of election officers strongly agreed with the statement that once voters were instructed on how to mark their ballot, they had little to no questions. Okay?
Can you go back to the slide before?
Yeah, of course.
Just to mention the highlight in the corner there that reminds me of the cookies.
Yes.
And you should all know that Gretchen had creatively had designed cookies on ranked choice voting, and there was every opinion that anyone has had. As I recall, smiley faces if you liked it, unhappy faces if you didn't like them, Frank, and then also neutral and those. And while I do have my strong personal opinions on the subject, I must say that during the course of the 2 days, I enjoyed every one of the cookies. I've not gone hungry since being on this board.
They were very good cookies brought in by one of our seasonal temporary employees. Okay. Yep. So those are the main takeaways that we had about ranked choice voting. In terms of outreach, we talked a little bit about this during our last meeting, but I just want to highlight that we did more than 20 outreach events with local organizations, civic associations, both political parties leading up to the election. And these were manned by 3 staff members, Tate, Tanya, and myself. In addition to that, we did train every election officer, and then our goal really was that grassroots education effort. So because a primary tends to have lower turnout, and they tend to have shorter lines, the goal was to talk to every voter and make sure every voter understood or had the option to have it explained to them prior to them getting their ballot. And so hopefully every election officer and every voter that came in did have the question asked them if they wanted more of an explanation on ranked choice voting. And the vast majority didn't have any questions. Yep.
What is an active voter?
It's a good question. So there are 2 statuses of voters, active and inactive. An inactive voter is somebody who we have mailed something to, or they have changed their address with the United States Post Office, and so we believe they no longer live at that address. So they get moved from active to an inactive status. Does that make sense?
Okay, so if you if they sign up and they said, I want you to mail a ballot.
No, anytime we get a returned mail, so anytime we mail a voter their voter card, a letter, let's say we move a polling location, anytime we mail a voter anything, if that correspondence is returned to us, we flag that voter in our system for a confirmation notice. And so once or twice a year, the Department of Elections sends each of these voters a notice saying, hey, we think you've moved. And then if they don't respond to that notice, they are made inactive. So it's not just a mail ballot, it's anytime we mail them anything. So,
Madam Chair, it may be helpful for me to add, but going back to when I first came on the board in 1994, the law provided that every 4 years there was a purge of any voters who had not voted in 4 years. That was done following a presidential year. When Congress passed the Help America Vote Act, that changed, and the legislative requirements as we have them now require us to have these 2 categories on the books.
mm-hmm. And so if a voter is in that inactive status where there's no action on their voting record for 2 federal elections, so that can be anywhere from 2 to 3 years, then we can go through the process of removing them from the rolls.
And it doesn't mean that they can't then register to vote.
Mm-hmm.
They can always register to vote. They just need to register to vote with their current address.
Yeah, and if they are inactive, they'll show on the poll book as inactive, and there's a prompt for the election officers that kind of guide them through what paperwork is needed before we can let them vote. So, yeah.
So if the mailing goes to the mailroom in a large apartment building and the mail clerk just throws it away,
I would.
they stay active, I guess.
There'd be no way to know.
It would have to be returned to us. So sometimes, and I know, so I moved into a house that had been a rental for a very long time, and so I'm still getting voter notices for people who I know no longer live there. I don't have the authority to remove them, but every time I get a piece of mail for them, I mark it return to sender, and that should be getting back to us. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I will say, if they change their address with their post office, then they also get put on this confirmation list. So but I would say I don't know that there's certain demographics that maybe don't know they should be changing their address with the post office when they move. Yeah.
Could you summarize, I've read the paragraph as the reason that we're doing or trying ranked choice voting. Could you summarize exactly why it is better than simply voting for one person? It says in here that if you're the person you vote for gets so few votes that maybe your second choice might get in there. But isn't that what always happened anyway with why is ranked choice voting better than the way we've been doing it? That's what I'd like to know, if you could summarize.
Yeah, so this is a complicated question. Initially, when we started our outreach programs, we were discussing some of the reasons why we were moving towards ranked choice voting. But some of the criticism that we received early on was that we were sounding too partisan in that. So I am very hesitant to speak to the benefits of ranked choice voting. But some of the arguments that other groups make, not necessarily that us, the Electoral Board or the office, make for ranked choice voting, are that it leads to more civil campaigns. So candidates are encouraged to appeal to as broad of electorate as possible. So rather than attacking each other, they'll run more civil campaigns of trying to appeal to as many voters as possible. There's also the idea of fair representation. So if we look historically at how many votes or what percentage of votes it takes to win in primary elections or even in general elections in Arlington, candidates can win the nomination or the seat with a very small percentage of the vote, maybe 20-25% of the vote. In ranked choice voting, the idea is that in order to win, you have to appeal to the broadest constituency as possible. And as you can see with this election, the two winning candidates did receive a vote from anywhere between 85 and 92% of the people who showed up to vote in this election.
Both of them were in the first three.
Yeah. So of the 228,897 ballots that were cast, somewhere between 85 and 92% of those had a vote for one of the winning candidates. If we look at the last time we had 2 open seats for county board in a Democratic primary in Arlington, the 2 candidates that won each had something like 20 and 21% of the vote. Mm-hmm. So that means anywhere between 20 and 41% of the ballots cast had a vote for one or both of those candidates.
I understand that. What strikes me is that if there were any problem with voting, a recount or so forth, it seems almost impossible to figure out what went wrong, or if there was anything, any fraud or anything else in the tabulation, because it's so complicated with all the decimal points that you have to win, the second and the third. It's enormously complicated, almost as if we're trying to conceal or obfuscate what really happened if anybody challenges it. And that really worries me.
Once again, like I said, I think I can speak for the Electoral Board in this office. We aren't necessarily advocating one tabulation method over another, but your question as to why ranked choice voting is considered preferable, these are some of these arguments for why.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that when you have a multi-seat election like we did, it is infinitely more complicated than if you just had. So I think certainly Gretchen ought to be commended for having run the election in the most complicated way it could possibly happen.
The math is weird. I said it. It's perhaps the worst possible election to have started this change, because it is the most complicated you're going to get with this.
Yeah.
With fractions and everything.
And that's where, like I said, one of the limitations that we have right now is after the election materials are sealed and transferred and that is part of the election integrity process that we have in Virginia, is we do not have access to any of those files. So in the case of a contested election or a recount, those files are preserved and they're immediately transferred to the court. So if there is a question, the courts can order them to be unsealed and for them to be examined. So it is, like, I know that it's a frustration because we've certainly gotten a number of requests for some of these data files, but part of that integrity process that we have in Virginia is that we no longer have access to those files. They've all been transferred to the courts.
It's just infinitely more complicated to see if something went wrong or.
Yeah.
Well, I do think I was very pleasantly surprised that, first of all, once we went through the checklist on ballots that were in the system exactly matched the overall number of ballots, and then they did the redistribution, and then we added a few on Saturday and did it a second time, and it came out exactly the same way.
I'm not really concerned about this particular election. I just think
so in other words,
globally,
if you do it twice and it works the same way, to me that gives me a fair amount.
It-
In
yeah.
all future elections, I'm not talking about that kind of.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, and there certainly have been, and with ranked choice voting, there have been some really high profile calculation errors across the country. But that's why we kind of learned from what we read about in New York City and Alameda County, California, so that we could make sure we weren't going to make some of those same errors here. And that's, we put those checks and balances in place. And for those who watched the tabulation, I'm not sure everybody enjoyed me having to go through the checklist, but we went through make sure every single data file from every single precinct was uploaded.
Every single time.
Yeah, before we looked at the results, I knew how many votes should have been on those data files. I confirmed that the number of votes that were tabulated matched what we were expecting before we looked at the results at all. So there's only, so we tried to put the controls and the checks and balances in place so that we were doing it as accurately as possible.
Madam Chair, having been in Richmond during the General Assembly session when Delegate Hope and Delegate Hudson introduced their bills, one of the major points that they made was that party nominees and potentially November winners ought to achieve 50%. Again, when it's the usual a single seat, just the same as that was part of the rationale for the Republican Party when they had, as you may recall, the ranked choice voting used for the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general in 2021, and also for party chairman. I think it's also worth mentioning, and also every year, as long as I've been active since 1964, the Republican Party has required in its nomination contests, and I believe it's the case in the Democratic Party as well, that a nominee receive, again, a single seat, a majority of the votes. Again, I have my own opinions on the subject, but I'll just say one more recent example elsewhere, which may be instructive, and I found of great interest, is the Senate district to which I'll soon be moving in Frederick County. There were 8 candidates for an open Senate seat, and the winner won with 32%.
That's a landslide in an 8-candidate race.
Pardon me?
That's a landslide in an 8-candidate race.
Mathematically, yes.
It went 32, 25, 12, 11, 8, 5, 2, and 2, including 8% for John Massoud, who some of us will recall from when he ran for the House of Delegates from here. Again, many people are fine with that. Plurality winner, first past the post, as the phrase goes. But because of that Senate district and 8% Republican voting history, that winner is going to be in the Senate with 32% of the vote.
And so you feel better, and I do too, with the idea of, I've forgotten the percentage, is it up there?
It was
Were voted for by 85%.
Yeah.
Of the people that voted, so I see your point there.
In terms of how I feel,
Ranked choice.
again, that goes into the personal opinions that each one of us has on the subject, as I'm sure you all do. Our job was, because we had to implement what we were directed to do by the county board. They're making the policy decision.
I mean, well, you see it. I mean, even this election, you just went straight up on first choice ballots. Then one of the 2 nominees would not have won the nomination. She was third after the first round.
Correct.
It was because people who voted for, no offense to any of them, also Rams, that were eliminated in early rounds, that she was the nominee. Those people would rather have had her than, I mean, I guess one could say, in the case of the Frederick County seat, what would have happened? Like, what would you say if you could do scientific polling and you could determine that of the 68% of people who didn't vote for the winner, all of them had that winner as their 8th choice. There were 32% who wanted him, and 68% of people who said anybody but him. You'd probably say maybe that's not the person that should be the nominee.
Again, good points, many points that I think are interesting and appropriate to keep in mind on both sides of the issue. And again, the county board will decide,
On
it being the
Saturday.
policymaking body on Saturday.
It's just the 2C thing, I think gets.
Yes, I agree. But I'm
And that is fundamentally different than the 50%, because when it's a single seat in the Code of Virginia, it's called instant runoff voting. So
Yes.
Virginia's not a runoff state, but if we were a runoff state like Georgia or Texas, those candidates would need to get 50% to move to the general election. That's a really common practice. Virginia's not a runoff state, so we have candidates moving forward with 20, 32% of the vote. When it's a multi-seat, it is called the single transferable vote, and it's not necessarily about getting 50%, but it's making sure that the multi-seat districts represent the electorate that showed up to vote. So if you've got an issue that's dividing the community, or an issue that has 30% of the 34% of support in that community, then both those issues deserve to have a seat on that board. Or that has, like I said, it's a representation thing more so than, a runoff, Anyway, it's different. It's just.
If they decide to go in the general election, the folks on our side of the aisle should actually favor that more than the people who actually sit on that board, because we can get to 34%. We can't get to 50%.
sign up and speak for Saturday. One last-
No, I don't want to make that case, because then they'll be like, maybe we shouldn't do that. We do want this.
It is a public meeting.
I'm not sure there's something.
And one last final point, if I may, and that is, again, it being the policy decision of the county board,
Mhm.
I do think from a mechanical procedural standpoint that it is better if the county board were to have picked the year to do it this year with the two seats, even though it was the two seats. I think an advantage is they were open seats, so no incumbent had an advantage. And also, better in this kind of a turnout year, as you could appreciate being such an able
It's
chief
the
in your
least
precinct,
hectic that you're gonna get.
rather than wait to next year, even though it's one seat in the presidential year, with the enormously higher, I think, occasion to have done training. So we made the best of what we had.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank you.
Yeah.
we were able to spend, it wasn't 10 minutes, but 2 or 3 minutes with each voter and say, here's the ballot, here's what you do, fill out, and then send them over to the marking station. Not that that solved the problem, there were still people who made mistakes more than once, but when you're dealing with 5 times the number of people and you start to have lines, you get angry people as you're sitting there for 2 or 3 minutes at a time.
I sent out the Chiefs email today, because I did get a lot of Chiefs commenting on that, but obviously I scaled down for a June election, so there would be a designated person to be there while they're in line explaining things, so definitely taking all that into consideration if we do move forward in the general election with staffing.
Yeah.
I mean, normally, like, I know for we had 5, we were supposed to have 6, somebody got sick. But at a regular general election, I'll have 10 or 11 people, and that means I have somebody outside telling people, have your ID ready. They could be asking, like, if you need help with ranked choice voting, maybe go to this line, and we'll spend more time with those people than other people. We didn't really have somebody that was able to kind of full-time be over by the marking stations in case somebody was like, oh, wait, I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
My plan is to give an additional person outside of what you would have been allotted last November, so that is taken into my personnel plans.
So we'll have sort of like we have a registration clerk, we'll have a.
Basically like an additional
instructional
greeter.
person.
Yeah, a hybrid greeter essentially.
Just the 85 to 92%
Yeah.
statement, I'm just wondering about that a little bit, because if there was a one-person race with, let's say, 3 candidates.
Yep.
And let's say everybody voted ranked all 3 candidates, you could say that the one person who won, 100% of people had that person on there. So I'm just wondering if that.
Not necessarily. You're assuming that voters are ranking all 3 candidates. There's certainly the case where voters did not choose to rank, even though they had the option of ranking 3 candidates. They did not choose to exercise their full slate of options.
Just as undervotes go up as you go down the the ballot, undervotes went up as you went to the right on the columns.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw it on our
Yeah.
our statement of results.
Yeah, they had a first choice, they maybe
Undervotes on
had a
the first
second choice,
second
they
choice
didn't
went up,
have a third
choice went
choice.
up.
Yeah.
That was part of my point earlier. And one last final point. In 1931, as Rich and I discussed the other day, 1931, when the county went to the county manager plan of government and 5 members on the county board, it used to be 3 commissioners and districts. But when going to 5 at-large members, they were all up at once. There was no staggering terms until 10 years later. But I mention it to say, as we discussed, for those 5 seats, there were 51 candidates. And I think it's good nobody had thought of ranked choice voting by then.
Actually,
Well, we
was
still would have
last
only been
year.
able to do 3, so.
Yeah, it was actually
No,
really
you had the
neat,
lever
actually.
machines.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, yeah, so, so it's from the, in a single seat race, tabulation stops once you hit 50%. So, if we go back and look at the county board general election, even last fall, I believe there were 3 candidates running, with write-ins, and the Matt DeFerente, I think, had 60%. So we wouldn't have even done ranked choice voting. He had crossed the threshold in that first round.
But if they would need to do the tabulation in a 3-person race, that's what I'm saying. Then
Yeah.
And let's just say the perfect scenario where everybody ranked 3.
Oh, I have worked with the public too long to imagine the perfect scenario.
Or
anyway.
if it was 90%, but
Yeah.
still, making the claim, though, all of that winner was on just about everybody's ballot,
Yeah.
it still doesn't mean that everybody wanted that.
So I bet, this is a question that actually is sort of related to that. How much, I know you're talking about like, the information goes off to the clerk, which is what has to happen. Like, how much were you able to, like, could you have saved if you had had a second copy of certain things? Like, how much can the machine give you in terms of this like sort of granular data?
No, it's definitely an interesting question. The way the code is written, it's you remove the data drive from the equipment, you place it in an envelope. We did need to get access to those, but we did access them in the presence of the clerk and a deputy clerk. And then they were immediately sealed and transferred over to the clerk's office. And even the equipment is also sealed for this contest period after the election. So I am interpreting that to say I shouldn't be making copies of these things. But once again, yeah.
So once you upload stuff into the tabulation software, is it in that system, or does it again, like, is it sort of like, once you pull the thumb drives out, that system remembers nothing? Like, I'm just wondering, like, and it might not be something you can do, it may be something that the General Assembly needs to look at and say, if we're going to go further with ranked choice voting, either in Arlington or expand the experiment statewide, maybe there needs to be some special provisions made about what can and can't be saved so that more information can be available, even if it's not available to the public, but available to you so you could.
Yeah.
So you and other registrars could do a more wholesome.
That's certainly one of my
analysis.
Recommendations. If I were going to make some legal recommendations for the General Assembly, that would be to examine that code section. And is it still, because some of these code sections were written so long ago, is it still in line with the current technology and how we currently do things? And is this how we still want to be able to do things? Because it was written at a time, I think even when lever machines, and it was very different machines were being used. So.
And in a I think just whether you have modern technology or primitive technology, I think having a ranked choice voting system or any sort of instant runoff kind of like this sort of system, just a very different set of information you kind of want available.
Yeah, and that's certainly been
it's really easy with the one choice, one vote for one kind of things. It's like either you voted for that one, or,
Yeah, that's certainly, I have heard, some people have the opinion, that, when ranked choice voting was authorized for use in Virginia, they really just changed one code section and they added essentially 5 sentences to the code. And, to completely change a voting system, our vote tabulation system, they didn't examine any other parts of codes or any other implications. So that has been one of those things that sometimes it's a good thing they didn't do that. They gave the freedom to the State Board of Elections, but some people have argued that they probably should have looked at things end to end for the elections process. So
More leeway to, in this case, I think they probably should have given more leeway to elect to be like, well, this would be good to have. We should keep
once again,
these sorts of, particularly like, so we're talking about like who put what where.
Yeah.
And it's hard to like, I know one thing that I think Frank had asked, which is, and you can't tell because we don't have the information. I'm not sure you could have gotten the information from the current system, is how many people had 3 people ranked? None of them, Maureen, Susan, Natalie. So that their ballots were, you know,
not
as I put it, how many people needed a 4th choice? Like where their first 3 choices
Yeah.
were all there and none of them won.
But that's also, there's always this, like I said, we can always look back and say, well, had it been done this way, the result might have been different. I don't know that you can say that because I know I've heard from voters that have said that they ranked the 3 they wanted to rank. They would not have ranked the 3 they didn't want to rank. And so even though their ballot was exhausted at this point in the election, for them, it doesn't really matter because they were never going to give a vote to one of the other 3 candidates.
Yeah, by far in early voting, the number 1 question we got asked is, do I have to rank 3 people?
Yeah.
The answer was no. So we never got asked, why are we only ranking 3? It's, do I have to?
Yeah,
rank
it was, yeah. So, okay.
I think, yeah, all right, so we'll go ahead and do the EXC presentation. Frank, question for you. Did you share this with the county
Yeah.
board?
I haven't yet, but I'm planning.
You should definitely share it with them.
It's gonna maybe, I could squeeze it in my speaking. I signed up to speak. So.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay, thank you for making the time. I appreciate it. I'll try to go through it quickly. So our election integrity team did an exit polling. I'm just going to fly through these slides a ton. Yeah, so the questions were developed by a group of us. 8 volunteers conducted the polling. 230 interviews were conducted. Bob Cambridge did a great job consolidating. First question on the exit poll was, how many board candidates did you rank? And they could have ranked 3. And the average was 2.58, so pretty high. Then the next question was, well, if you did say 3, how important was it for you to be able to rank a 3rd choice? And then the answer, 36% said very important, next 33 somewhat important, and 31% not important. Next is if you answered less than 3, why did you rank fewer than 3? Next, lack of information on the candidates, 23%, 19% said they wanted to maximize their impact, and 52% said they didn't like the other candidates.
And I'm fascinated by the 19%.
They just didn't understand the system.
Yeah,
We
it
did.
doesn't,
We really
it doesn't
tried
do
to-
what you think it does.
Yeah, that was one of the concerns that even Rich raised at the very beginning of this process.
So then
That works in the old system, where you don't want to have a second vote out there. Muddying.
So the next question, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high, how well do you understand how ranked choice voting works in regards to 1, ranking candidates and marking the ballot? That got a high rank of 4.21, but then when it was asked about post-election tabulation processes, it went down to 3.15. What should be the maximum number of days before getting election results using ranked choice voting? 20% said election night, 24% said 3 days, 24% said 7 days, 8% or was okay. Next 20% didn't know. 4% didn't care. So I think, yeah, that also reflects a little bit. They didn't completely understand the process, which was going to be at least 3 or 4 days.
I would argue the timeline for ranked choice voting tabulation and the timeline for certifying any election is the same. It's just, traditionally media calls the results election night, but we can't make sure every valid vote is counted, and we do not declare a winner until through the entire canvass period.
Exactly.
So-
We have to wait until the mail-in ballot deadline hits. We have to wait for the state to come back to us on the same-day registrations. So we don't declare the results officially until we sign off.
So the timeline it didn't adjust, ranked choice voting didn't adjust our timeline at all.
Timeline didn't change, but if it was a clear majority at the beginning, then everybody would know. But you ranked choice voting, you don't technically. Well, you might know.
Gretchen, at the precinct where I was doing exit polling, a majority of the people who I talked to said that they were told by the election officers that the results would be known by Friday.
That was.
We had said Friday at the earliest, is what we had told the election officers. Friday at the earliest.
But the voters.
Which precinct were you at?
I'll tell Gretchen.
So Kate can make sure her.
Yeah.
She knows that.
Yeah, certainly
Don't
our
worry.
hope was to finish on Friday. That wasn't possible with some other statutory deadlines.
But they were saying, oh, they told us we'd know by Friday.
Yeah, Friday at the earliest was, so that at the earliest was missed. So that's good feedback to have. So that's definitely a communication point we can emphasize. Should we do this again?
Madam Chair, I think, John, perhaps what they had in mind was knowing that the voters had until Friday noon on provisional IDs, and also that the mail ballots deadline was Friday noon. That could be what they were thinking, or they just kind of shorthanded what was suggested. Maybe.
I don't know, but.
Excellent point. That's very helpful.
But the exact question.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. What you mentioned is very helpful. Those are just the kind of comments. Any of you have other comments? Very helpful for the board to have that in mind for next year. And you should also know that there will be a bill, as my colleagues know, from a legislative committee of the Electoral Board Association, in which I participated on Monday night. There will be a bill introduced at the request of several of our committee members, including Kate Hanley from Fairfax, to extend the deadline on getting the abstracts into the state board from 7 days after the election, the following Tuesday, to 10 days. And that came out of a session that my colleagues will recall from the Northern District meeting, and it was unanimous that would help. And now that just extends what used to be election day further into an election season. But that's part of the education process that we need to continue to emphasize to people in terms of how soon we can get the results in. But certainly I would say, as we sat here election night, we had our results in far earlier than many localities, including Prince William and Fairfax, as usual. But your comments are very helpful. Thank you.
Right, and this discussion came up because we're actually considered a large jurisdiction, along with Fairfax and Prince William. And so it actually takes us more time to get the work that we need to get done in order to make sure that everything is double, triple, and quadruple checked. Fairfax in particular has how many?
242.
Yeah, 242. So can you imagine?
Yeah, Kate does.
She
more than
doesn't
that.
have to imagine, she lives it.
Yeah, and that's statutorily, there are certain things that only the electoral board members can do, and larger localities don't get more board members. The 3 individuals are asked to do the same, whether they have 600,000 voters or whether they have 1,600 voters. So.
And also, we could have finished perhaps on Friday. We could have finished perhaps on Friday if we didn't have to deal with the same-day voter registration. And we did not receive, as I know Frank knows from being here, we did not receive the list, the cross-check list from the state board until Saturday.
That was not my point.
Oh, no, I agree. I'm just saying for the information of all
The
of you.
voters should not have been told.
I agree. Correct. They should not have been told Friday. Correct. Agreed. I was just saying, just so that you all know that we worked as rapidly as we could, both last year, even without the same day, well, with the same day voter registration. We had 2,000, as I recall. And this year it was less than 200, I believe.
Same day registrations were less.
And those are, in terms of voter integrity, I think it's important for all of you to know that the state board cross-checks those to make sure there are no duplicates. There were none this time. No one went to vote, register and vote in more than one locality. In terms of Arlington, last year we did have one person, so the system worked. But that's just for your background information, and that's something that, again, we can continue to communicate to the voters going forward. Your point is excellent, well taken.
I have full faith in the actions of residents.
Thank you.
And Frank, I apologize for treating
Don, your comment is perfect confirmation of our extension of our contract.
So the final question was, do you prefer the prior simpler voting system? 41% said yes. Do you prefer the ranked choice voting? 59% said yes. So I would just maybe qualify that answer a little bit with just a motivated democratic base that was voting in this case, probably among the most educated. But, and then even still then 41% had some concerns, but 59% favored the ranked choice voting. So I'll maybe just try to go through these quickly. So some of the comments, most people don't know all the candidates. Their opinion is what they've been told. They couldn't evaluate the benefits until the results came through. Some were having second thoughts as they learned more about the post-election. Not jazzed about RCV. Don't think it's fair. Suggest doing RCV by ranking the candidates you least want.
Frank, was that your comment?
No. Interesting. Doesn't see the need for three choices. I liked it. Want it simpler. I hate it. I'm calling the board. Throw these ballots out. Not beneficial at all. Next.
What is the reason for three choices if you only have to pick two?
It's a system limitation. We can only rank up to 3 with our current voting equipment.
No, I mean, why not just pick two?
That's how it used to be. Some people did.
Oh, you
Some
can't.
people ranked 1, some people ranked 2.
Able to have the second choices if your candidate.
Yeah, you weren't required to rank 2.
No, I know, but what if you were told, pick two out of this 5? Would that?
That's the traditional system. That's how it was always done.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the previous system would have been vote for two.
Oh,
The
okay.
instruction.
All right, thank you.
For this race, ranked choice voting is preferred. I feel these are leading questions. I want to say, try ranked choice voting. Do away with this now. Why are we doing this? Not sure about it. Hate it. It's all tampered with anyway. Kind of funky, too complicated. I remember when things were simpler. If you pick a candidate, get the results that night. Don't care for RCV. Just want to vote and go home and not be bothered with new system. First choice was most important. Second choice, somewhat. Third didn't matter. Had to rank 3 because there were 3. No regard for RCV and don't like it. Don't care how, this is for in terms of the results. Several people basically said they don't care how long it takes as long as you get it right. Delays are okay as long as they're getting it right. Why should it take more than a few hours? Take as much time as it takes to get it right. Okay, waiting until all the votes are counted. Need to wait for mail-in ballots. 7 days is plenty. Results should be election night to avoid mischievous behavior. Okay, waiting until they get it right. Would like results as soon as possible. Why should we wait for results? 3 days, plenty of time. In terms of understanding, again, some folks said that it was hard to say what the benefits would be until the whole process played out. Most people don't know about RCV, could be more information, unsure what benefits are, need to understand both voting and post-election, needs better explanation, tabulation seems opaque, studied RCV before coming to make an informed decision, didn't realize the complexity. It's so confusing, had to ask many questions. Does ballot position affect the outcome? Understood ranked choice voting after explanation by election officer.
That was your precinct.
So I think that's it, right?
We didn't have exit polls.
Now, you said
I didn't see
that
any
one of the
voting.
people said that they felt the questions were biased. I have to say, I thought your questions were fairly fair. What was the person's rationale for thinking they were biased questions?
I wasn't the exit poll taker for that one. So, I mean, we had, I don't know. That's a
I
good question.
think that I was at one of the precincts and there was another group, one of the pro
Up for
ranked choice
Virginia.
centers. Have we heard their results of their poll?
No, I have not heard anything from Upvote Virginia. I do believe that they are also scheduled to speak Saturday at the county board meeting. One of the questions I have is, do you remember which locations you were at? I know you did early voting and election day.
That was primarily the two early voting satellites and,
Okay.
and maybe 3 or 4 precincts.
Okay, so yeah, and you were at both Walter Reed and Madison.
Yes.
Okay. And here, were you here? I feel like I saw people here.
We tried to come here, but it was too difficult because people coming out of the building you don't know.
The farmer's market complicates things on a Saturday.
So yeah, we gave up on that. But it was a good exercise. It was fun to meet. Everybody enjoyed meeting people. But I would just say, like, again, commend the election office and the board for a great job implementing your mandate successfully, which was excellent. But I think implementing the mandate successfully, also there's still concerns about the process, which is no critique of what the election office did. And so from what I've seen, is that it's the added complexity. That's what I'm concerned with. The tabulation process that requires results immediately decrypted and transferred to another computer and tabulated on a third-party software. And the additional steps involved perhaps would lead people to be confused and to erode some of the trust. So that's one issue. And then potentially the disenfranchisement of vulnerable voters or disadvantaged voters who, again, don't understand and don't fill out either, several choices, and therefore their ballots might become exhausted. So I think there's a risk of that as well. So and then the whole exhausted ballot thing, that's another discussion. But according to the results, it could have been up to, I think, 16, 17%.
So once again, like I said, once candidates were once Maureen Coffey crossed the threshold, any ballots that were exhausted from Natalie Roy or Susan Cunningham, they could have contained votes for Maureen, but we just don't know. That's one of those gaps in the data so when Natalie Roy was eliminated, I can see how many ballots were exhausted from Natalie Roy, but I don't know how many of those ballots ultimately would have contained a vote for Maureen Coffey.
That's where it said there's a variance there.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I'd like to ask Steve, as the party chair, do you have any comments you'd like to make? Any observations, comments from candidates, your own thoughts?
I think you guys did a commendable, terrific job on this first-time trial of single transferable vote. I'm as interested as everyone else, just sort of seeing how it plays out. But I think.
Did you get any feedback from any of the losing candidates? They thought it was not fair, other than the fact that it's not fair to lose.
I did not. And we've run several of these processes on our school board vote. I think in only one of those did someone who was not in the lead actually become in the lead through subsequent ranking. So you generally don't see that. And that certainly happened in this situation where the third place candidate on the initial round ended up on top. But I'm a general believer in the system. As you said, Katie and Christian ended up with right around 20% each. I think that race maybe had about 10 candidates, so they actually.
There were 6 candidates running in that race as well.
6, all right.
Yeah. So.
But if I'm not mistaken, the percentages are over what amounts to twice the number of people who voted. So really, you almost can't get, like, to get to 50% would have to mean that almost literally everybody that voted had
It would be
you.
33% because it's 2 open seats.
No, I meant in the old system, like, because we're talking about
Yeah,
the 2019 race, like, so if in our case, 28,000 people voted, you'd have somewhere in the vicinity of, say, 56,000 votes as a total, and their total would be over 56,000, which means.
but voters get 2 votes in that race, so.
Right, but what I mean is you can't vote for the same person twice.
Mm.
So if I vote for 2 people, then one person gets 50% of my vote and one person gets 50% of my vote. So 20% sounds low, but it's not a one vote rate. It's almost like, that's kind of almost like twice the percentage. Like you figure 40% of people put Katie in on their ballot, because otherwise you don't get to the right number. Like, there's probably some math person that could tell you how that works and like what the probability is of like what range of people had to vote for Katie.
Yeah.
Like, voters had to put Katie on the ballot.
I don't know everyone's expertise in this room, but I don't see a mathematician.
No, but what I'm saying is that it's not 20% of voters voted for Katie. And
So
20%,
we
yeah.
had to do the math before this because
Yeah,
we
we
were
did
looking
the
at
math,
it, and
yeah.
it is, so there's ballots cast, right, which is how many voters voted, and then there's votes cast for that race. So you did get 2 votes. It wasn't one vote split in half. So there wasn't an exact double the number because some people didn't vote at all, some people didn't vote for 2.
Right.
So when you look at how many ovals were filled in on that race, they both received right around 22%. So out of how many ovals were filled in on that race, so it was like 19,000 something, they both received right around 22% of the vote. So that's how we look at it.
And I understand the argument you're making where, yeah, but you couldn't have 100% of your vote go to, but you essentially got 2 votes and 1 vote, every voter in that election had the opportunity for 2.
Because it is how the numbers
Yeah.
are reported.
Yeah, no, what I mean is so if you have the number of total ballots that were cast.
Right.
Which would
It
be,
was like over 10,000.
okay, then take the number of votes for each of those candidates and divide it by that number instead of the total number of ovals voted.
But we don't know, you're not accounting for undervotes. So just because we have that number of ballots cast doesn't mean that many voters voted in that race. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's how many voters voted on the ballot, but.
Yeah, I'm just saying, the way that the 20% is calculated may make it seem like you can't compare that to a 1-seat race where somebody has like Frederick County's Senate seat. That guy got 32% of the vote,
Right.
period. 32% of people voted for that guy. 20%, you can't compare Katie's 20% to that 32% because the numbers don't.
Right.
The math is different than in a 1-person race. That's what.
Yeah.
If she had gotten 20% and it was Katie's race, like next year, the 1-seat race, and you have 8 candidates and 1 person wins at 20%, that's to me, a different number than.
Yeah.
She still didn't get 50, but like.
Yeah, I'll also, in that election turnout was, I think we have it
Just
in
over
here.
10,000.
Yeah, it was 8% of active voters. So to move from 8% to 19%, I mean, it was a pretty high turnout election in terms of Democratic primaries for Arlington County.
Do you remember what else was on?
The ballot in 20, I don't, the information's on our
It was
website,
like
I don't
one
have it on my
state.
hands.
Yeah, I think it was.
I'm wondering how much of the increase was because there were a bunch
District.
of other things.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, and that's like, so on page 3 of the report, you can see, there.
And the Commonwealth attorney race was definitely.
Yeah, that was
The
definitely.
number of pieces of paper I got in my mailbox over the course of 6 weeks.
Yeah, and if you look at the 2019 primary, the main race on that 2019, because we didn't have a county board primary in 2019, but that county, the Commonwealth's attorney race generated 70% turnout that year, and that was pretty much the only thing
That
on
was
the
another
ticket.
barn burner of them.
Yes. Dominic, if I can just say thank you for your latest comments, and Steve, thank you for yours. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but it occurred to me with you right in front of me.
That's
That
fine,
happens.
and thank you all for the job well done.
Well, thank you, and some of your voters had the experience, certainly, as you mentioned, with the school board ranked choice voting, and also with the county board special election, when caucus did overcome on the second ballot, Barbara Keenan. So I understand how he supports it. All right, thanks.
For that presentation.
Yes, thank you very much. Agree with what Kim said. Please send that to the county board in advance, along with anything else. They really appreciate that. It'll be helpful to you and to them. We'll be there.
I called to see what time they thought they were going to debate that. It's item 61.
Yeah.
The lady gave me an estimate of maybe between 1 and 1:30, but she said it depends how quickly the other things go out. Do you guys have any?
I know who you spoke to based on the answer. I have been told anywhere between 1:30 and 4. So you certainly spoke to the more optimistic of the individual. It is, as you, when I have talked to other people about the length of the county board agenda, pretty much everyone agrees like, oh, it's going to be the afternoon. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Obviously depends on how much discussion there is with the 60 other items before us and how many of them were pulled and moved to Tuesday's meeting. But as of yesterday, the answer I was given was between 1:30 and 4.
Any further?
Just one question about the possibility of getting the CRV files, the passport record, if they come back to be processed from the clerk's office.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have a timeline on that, so.
Okay, but just to give you a heads up, there's some folks would be interested in that if it's available.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're still in this waiting period, so. I would say nobody's more anxious to be able to get in there, get access to our equipment than we are, so that we can start getting ready for the next election. But we just have to wait. So.
Question related to something Scott brought up, which I was going to ask, but Scott kind of mentioned the process with the state board on the same day registrations.
Yes.
So it sounded like they came back Saturday again,
Mm-hmm.
which is what they did in November.
Yes.
One would have to assume, given our experience, the number they processed was considerably down
Yes.
from November. Did anything change about what they're doing? I know there was some talk about maybe they were going to try to streamline things, so it didn't take until Saturday, so that you guys weren't all rushing to get things. Since so much can't happen until that comes back, and there's 2,000 votes, and you'd have to go through each one.
No, I can't certainly speak on behalf of the departmental level elections or the state board of elections, but I have heard that this is one of the processes that they might re-examine moving into November. I do know anecdotally from my colleagues in Northern Virginia who did have some of the highest numbers same-day registrations. We were all done processing and entering by Thursday, so there really was. We don't know why there was a delay, why they wouldn't run the report sooner than they did. So we can't speak on their process.
Of course, I was just wondering if they had mentioned anything in the process, like, or if Saturday is going to be the deal for.
And this is also I did not get the guidance explaining the timeline for that process until after the election. And I do know there were several electoral boards who had already scheduled meetings to complete their canvass, and they all had to delay. So.
I mean, I'm just thinking ahead, like November, hopefully is less, like the number is lesser than it was last November, but you're looking ahead to next November, which is theoretically going to be a lot bigger than last November.
I think March is also going to be pretty big.
Depends on if we're having a dual primary.
Yes.
And that is certainly a question I've been given. So if anyone from a political party knows whether we'll be having a dual party, I have some reporters that I can send your way.
And this is a factor also, I think it's worth adding, Madam Chair, this is a factor in Delegate Sickles introducing the bill. I mentioned on the abstracts, both in terms of the same-day voter registration verification and also the way the calendar works, bumping up against a Monday holiday, oftentimes, as we've experienced numerous times.
Yeah, this November, it's a Friday holiday, so Veterans Day will be recognized the Friday after the November election, as it was last year, which delays the mail ballot deadline and the ID provisional deadlines to Monday at noon. So
And we still have to complete the election by
Tuesday.
Has anyone ever suggested that the size of the board depend upon size of the jurisdiction? That's sort of a question for Scott. I feel like he would probably know what's floated around in Richmond and Harrisburg.
Well, thanks. In my years on the board, I have not heard a suggestion to change the size of the board. As my colleagues know, there's consideration of compensation, which when I came on the board, I had no idea that there was any. But there's been no suggestion of that. And that's a very creative thought on your part, Dominic. If the board were increased, that would have a substantial budget impact.
Well, I mean, like,
And the
maybe-
General Assembly.
It may be a good idea.
right, I'm just thinking like
Sure.
if you increase the board to 5 in, say, 6 or 7 counties. I'm not like, you put
Sure.
it around Norfolk and Newport.
like the larger jurisdiction.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Arlington.
yeah,
Arlington, Fairfax, Prince William, like Norfolk,
Yes.
Henrico, like, you maybe have a handful of these counties that have such a,
The other option is certain duties for the electoral board can be delegated. So
Yes.
it's examining which duties can be delegated to staff and which ones can. So
Rich, and that was part of our discussion at the VEBA Legislative Committee meeting. There was with respect to the subject of compensation, which I hate to even talk about. But I think that certainly my colleagues have earned certainly theirs in their service. There was a bill that was introduced by Senator and now Congresswoman McClellan 2 years ago, and Kim and Gretchen might recall, that would have examined the entire system of elections, including the role, didn't mention the numbers, but that would certainly be an appropriate part of it. Consideration of the roles, responsibilities of the local department of elections, the director of elections, and the board. And I think that probably likely will happen. I would say that when I'm on these legislative calls, I have felt that we're so blessed with the number and quality of our staff. It seems to me that ought to be a focus, increasing the staffs in some of the smaller jurisdictions rather than necessarily the board, but that could also be an excellent idea. And so I appreciate your suggesting it.
I mean, maybe the answer is instead of having more board members, to provide those larger jurisdictions with more freedom or leeway to delegate certain things off to staff.
And the staff here certainly, again, serving for cumulative 20 years, going back to 94, I've seen the staff in here increase as appropriate with the support of the county board. That's a matter that the directors of elections would need to take up with their governing bodies. So my instincts tell me that really is where I see a need, but certainly considering some talk about enlarging the Supreme Court of the United States, certainly considering increasing the electoral board is also a fair topic for consideration. Thanks.
All right. Any other questions, comments? All right. So then we're actually going to go into closed session. So let's see here. Let's see. It is 6:44 p.m. Okay. I move that the electoral board go into closed session pursuant to State Code Section 2.2-3711A for the purpose of discussing issues related to personal matters not related to public business.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Get us out of closed session here.
Let me just go.
It is,
We're putting on a closed session just because you
What
want
about
to
you?
read it.
all
Say vote by
right.
vote rolls.
It is
1840 called dead, so-
7:13.
I've heard of it.
I move that the electoral board return to public session and certify that only public business matters lawfully exempt from open meeting requirements by Virginia law, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed session were heard, discussed, or considered.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Right. We are now in open session again, and it is officially 7:14. So I move that we adjourn the meeting.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.